Hashirajima Anchorage, Hiroshima Bay, June 14, 1942. The fleet is coming home. Ships that left 10 days ago are moving through grey water toward their moorings. From the dockside, they look like any other returning fleet. Iron and paint and signal flags, the mechanical geometry of warships at sea. But something is wrong with the arrival. The men being carried off these vessels are not going to their families. They are not going to dockside canteens, not being released on shore leave. They are going to hospital wards, and when the ward doors close behind them, armed sentries take up position in the corridors. The nurses and orderlies know better than to ask questions. The men in those wards are called, in the paperwork, Himitsu Kanja, secret patients. They cannot receive family visits. They cannot send letters home. They cannot speak to doctors brought in from outside the classified section. Many are badly burned. Many are in shock. Some will take weeks to remember what happened to them. And somewhere beyond those ward walls, on every radio in Japan, an announcer's voice is speaking with quiet authority. The Imperial forces, he says, have won a great victory in the Pacific. The men in the wards do not respond to this. They lie in silence. Who were these men? What had they seen? And why was the truth of what they knew burned into their bodies, carried behind their eyes? Dangerous enough that the government of Japan chose to make them disappear. The answer runs forward for 3 years, and it costs Japan more than the battle itself ever did. The government was protecting a story it had spent 6 months making true. From December 1941 through the spring of 1942, Japan delivered on nearly every promise. The attack on Pearl Harbor struck the United States Pacific Fleet in its harbor and crippled it in a single morning. Singapore, which the British had called impregnable, fell in 2 weeks. Hong Kong fell. The Philippines fell. The Dutch East Indies, with their oil fields and their rubber, fell. In 5 months, Japan had achieved the conquest of a maritime empire stretching thousands of miles, at a cost in blood so low it seemed almost to confirm the ideology that had driven the expansion. The ideology had a name: Yamamoto Damashi, the Japanese spirit, the conviction that their warriors possessed a quality of will and selflessness that no Western army could match. For 6 months, the victories seemed to prove it. The propaganda had not needed to fabricate very much. Reality had done most of the work, but the machine that packaged those victories, that turned battlefield dispatches into national mythology, had been built long before the first shot was fired. The 1941 revision of Japan's national mobilization law eliminated freedom of the press entirely. In February 1942, all newspapers were ordered to merge or cease publication. Editors who survived the consolidation understood the terms of their survival. The Japan Publishers Association agreed to self-screen manuscripts before submission to government censors. Self-censorship nested inside official censorship, an architecture that required no enforcement because it had become instinct. NHK, the state broadcaster, organized its programming around military success. Daily broadcasts extended beyond news. Educational talks on rationing, production campaigns, monthly rebroadcasts of the Emperor's declaration of war aired at precisely 11:59 in the morning. Radio listening was organized through neighborhood associations. No one was to be left outside the national message. Receiving unauthorized foreign shortwave broadcasts was a crime. This was not a system that had to scramble when bad news arrived. It was a system already running, already broken to the bit. When Midway happened, the government of Japan did not need to build new machinery. It simply fed the existing machine different material. In the spring of 1942, in a basement in Pearl Harbor called Station Hypo, a team of American naval cryptanalysts is doing something that Yamamoto does not know is possible. They are reading his mail. The Imperial Japanese Navy's encrypted message traffic is not impenetrable. American signals intelligence has been exploiting lapses in Japanese cryptological procedure to decode up to 90% of IJN transmissions. The Japanese are using two cipher systems, codenamed Red and Purple, running concurrently, which creates exploitable overlap. A newer code setting, JN25B, should have been fully rolled out months earlier. It wasn't. That delay gives Station Hypo additional time to work with familiar patterns. By early 1942, the cryptanalysts know that Japan is planning a major offensive operation. They can see it assembling in the traffic, supply orders, ship movements, coordination signals. The target is designated AF. But which installation, precisely? The Americans send a test. The base at Midway broadcasts a plain text message reporting a shortage of fresh water. Within days, an intercepted Japanese transmission confirms that AF is short of fresh water. The target is confirmed. Station Hypo gives Admiral Chester Nimitz the date, June 4th or 5th, and the complete order of battle of the attacking force. Nimitz does not wait. He positions 3 carriers northeast of Midway, where the Japanese plan accounts for nothing. Then there are the pre-battle war games. Japanese officers run a full rehearsal of the operation in the weeks before departure. The officer assigned to play the American side does exactly what Nimitz will do. The results of the simulated engagement anticipate, nearly point for point, what will happen on the morning of June 4th. The game umpire reviews the outcome. He rules it impossible. He restores the Japanese losses, and the exercise moves on. Japan has rehearsed its own defeat. It has looked at what could go wrong and decided it couldn't. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, the most powerful carrier strike force in the history of naval warfare moves toward Midway. The men aboard believe they are hunters. They have spent months telegraphing every detail of their plan to an enemy who has spent months preparing their answer. They have been warned in their own command's war room by their own officers. They do not know any of this. The sky over Midway on the morning of June 4th is clear and nearly perfect. The ocean this far out is deep blue and featureless from altitude, and the coral atoll sits on the horizon like a white scratch against the water. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, steam in formation, their flight decks alive with aircraft. At 7 o'clock, a radio message arrives from Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, leading the first strike wave back from Midway. There is need for a second attack. Tominaga's planes had hit the island. They had been hit back hard. Marine fighters and anti-aircraft fire struck almost half the 108-plane strike, downing 11 aircraft, damaging 14 more. The island's installations are not neutralized. Nagumo makes his decision. He orders his reserve aircraft. The 107 planes held armed for anti-ship strikes, in direct contravention of Yamamoto's standing orders. Rearmed for a second attack on the island. The flight decks fill with planes in mid-transition. Bombs come up from the magazines. Torpedo crews pull their weapons and wait for replacements. Fuel lines run across the deck plates. The ships are busy, laden, organized around the assumption that the only target worth hitting is the atoll ahead of them. At 7:28, a search aircraft reports an American surface force. At 8:09, a correction. The force includes what appears to be a carrier. Nagumo orders the rearming stopped. He orders it reversed. The decks are chaos. Half his aircraft in transition, loaded with the wrong weapons, unmoved from the wrong positions. At 10:20 in the morning, American dive bombers come out of the sun. They come from the northeast, where the Japanese plan accounts for nothing. The combat air patrol has been drawn down low, responding to torpedo bomber attacks that have been dying in waves for 2 hours. The altitude is unguarded. 3 carriers hit in 5 minutes, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu. The ordnance stacked on their decks. The bombs, the aviation fuel, the weapons in transition, begins cooking off. Columns of black smoke rise into the clear sky, visible from 50 miles. The Akagi will burn for 16 hours before Japanese destroyers put her under. Survivors describe floating among burning fuel slicks and wreckage, the ocean itself on fire. On the bridge of the Akagi, Nagumo stands near the ship's compass and does not move. His chief of staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, has to physically take hold of him, has to persuade him, then insist, that he transfer his flag to the light cruiser Nagara. This man commanded the attack on Pearl Harbor. He stood on this same bridge 6 months ago, watching history open beneath him. Now Kusaka guides him off a burning ship. Nagumo's contemporaries had said it plainly before the battle. Admiral Nishizo Tsukahara, who knew him, put it with no softening. He was wholly unfitted by background, training, experience, and interest for command of Japan's carrier force. He had been appointed because of his seniority, and now he is being led across the flight deck of a dying vessel toward a small cruiser, toward a flag he will fly over nothing that matters. Hiryu survives the morning and launches her own strikes, fatally wounding the American carrier Yorktown. By late afternoon, Hiryu too is burning. 4 fleet carriers, 1 day. The fleet turns for home. In the haste of the withdrawal, the men in the water are left where they are. 3,000 of them. The fleet has no time to linger. The ocean takes them and closes over them, and the fleet sails away. And 10 days of silence pass at sea, while the country they are returning to has already been told it won. Return to those hospital wards at Hashirajima, the guards in the corridors, the nurses under orders they have not been asked to question, the men who cannot write home, cannot name their ships, cannot explain to their families where they are or why the visits are forbidden. It is June 1942 in Japan, and outside those walls, the radios are playing victory. The Naval Information Bureau controls what the newspapers print. In the last days of June 1942, the announcement appears in the major papers. It reports American losses. It praises Japanese valor. It elevates the Aleutian Campaign, a subsidiary operation that sees the American islands of Attu and Kiska, the only occupation of United States territory during the entire war, into the headline event. The diversion at Midway, the papers say, allowed the Navy to win a brilliant victory in the Aleutians. 4 carriers are not mentioned. 3,000 dead are not counted. No ships are named, no dates specified. The bodies have not been recovered. The retreat was too hasty for that. The survivors are handled systematically. They are told not to speak, told explicitly, with the clarity that military authority provides. Tameichi Hara, a destroyer commander who was present during the operation, is instructed directly not to discuss what he witnessed with anyone outside his chain of command. Other ships' crews are confined to their vessels. Many ships are diverted to ports outside the home islands, specifically to prevent chance encounters with the civilian population. The surviving officers and men of the lost carriers are dispersed, assigned to units in the South Pacific, to the island campaigns now grinding in the Solomons and the Bismarck Sea. The majority will die there. They will take what they knew with them. Even the language is drafted into service. Retreat is not a permitted word. In 1943, the Army will coin a new term, tenshin, to march elsewhere, to describe what happens when Japanese forces are driven from their positions. The vocabulary of failure simply does not exist. The scale of the concealment ran deeper still. Hideki Tojo, Prime Minister of Japan, simultaneously War Minister, the public face of the nation's war effort, was not informed of what happened at Midway for approximately 1 month after the battle. The head of the government did not know. The Imperial Japanese Navy had maintained its institutional secrecy even from its nominal political superior, from the man whose public authority the cover-up was ostensibly designed to protect. The Army-Navy rivalry in Imperial Japan was structural and vicious, and it had grown so deep that the Navy would rather let the Prime Minister go on being photographed at victory ceremonies than tell him what had actually happened. This was not a government lying to its people. It was an institution that had become structurally unable to tell the truth to anyone. And then there were the men from the Hiryu. 35 sailors from the carrier's engineering section were left for dead when she was abandoned before dawn on June 5th. They made their way topside as the ship went under, found a boat in the wreckage, and set out across the open Central Pacific. 2 weeks at sea, June in the tropics, temperatures above 90 degrees, no fresh water, no certainty of position or direction. American naval patrols found them. They were recovered. They were questioned, as prisoners of war in the standard way, about Japanese naval capabilities. They answered. The men Japan had been most urgently trying to silence spoke freely to the enemy. What does it cost to lie at this scale? The answer is not primarily moral, it is operational. Japan lost 120 experienced aviators at Midway. Pilots trained before the war in a program of extraordinary rigor, men with thousands of flight hours who had taken years to produce. The Navy knew this, but because the losses had been smoothed into something the institution could absorb without admitting the magnitude of what had happened, no urgency was created to rebuild the pipeline. Training aircraft remained a low production priority. Flight hours were cut. The cadets who moved through the system in 1942 and 1943 entered combat with a fraction of the hours their American counterparts had logged. In the grinding attrition of the Solomons campaign, the final cadres of Japan's pre-war elite squadrons were destroyed. What came after them was insufficient, not because of a shortage of young men, but because the institution had hidden the problem rather than addressed it. The carriers could not be replaced quickly enough. Japanese shipyards would not rebuild the 4 lost fleet carriers on a unit-for-unit basis until early 1945. By that point, the United States had commissioned a dozen Essex-class fleet carriers and dozens more light and escort carriers. Japan would possess 18 carriers in total across the entire war. 14 would be lost. The United States would end the war with 29. The arithmetic of industrial production had been running against Japan since the first day. Yamamoto himself had understood this and said so. But the arithmetic of the carrier battle at Midway should have created institutional urgency. Instead, it was concealed, and the urgency never came. To its Axis partners, Japan said nothing true. Germany and Italy were planning operations predicated on Japanese naval superiority that no longer existed. When the Axis was defeated at El Alamein in the fall of 1942, Italy asked why the Japanese Navy had failed to cut British supply routes in the Mediterranean. The Axis powers seldom practiced genuine coalition warfare, but Japan had ensured that its partners were fighting their parallel wars in genuine darkness. The institutional culture that produced the cover-up continued producing exactly the kinds of decisions that had caused the disaster. A genuine revision of carrier doctrine emerged in late July 1942, a document that finally recognized the aircraft carrier as the centerpiece of naval power. But recognizing doctrine and changing institutional behavior are different things. The same dispersed formations that had left Nagumo's carriers unsupported at Midway appeared again in the Solomons, appeared again at Leyte Gulf in October 1944. The institution had learned to write different doctrine. It had not learned to think differently. And Yamamoto. On April 18, 1943, Fleet Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto boards a transport aircraft at Rabaul for an inspection tour of forward positions. The route is known. The schedule is known. It is known because American Signals Intelligence has intercepted and decoded his itinerary. The same apparatus, Station Hypo and its network, that read his Midway plans a year earlier and handed Nimitz his ambush. 16 American P-38 fighters launched from Guadalcanal. Yamamoto had studied at Harvard. He had lived in Washington. He had watched American factories and American ports and American roads, and gone home to tell the Japanese government that a war with the United States was a war Japan could not win. He had forced through the Midway operation by threatening resignation, believing early offensive action was Japan's only chance before American production became overwhelming. He had told his subordinates after the defeat that he would take the blame himself and tell the emperor the truth. He was kept in command because removing him would have been an institutional admission. The code breakers killed him. The same intelligence that destroyed his fleet at Midway guided the fighters that found his transport over the jungles of Bougainville. The man who designed Pearl Harbor, won 6 months of victories, lost Midway, and died in a war he had told his leaders Japan could not win, was killed by the Americans who had been reading his orders for more than a year. Japan fought on through Guadalcanal, where a campaign meant to be a brief consolidation became a 6-month attrition battle that consumed the last cadres of elite naval aviators. Through the Philippine Sea, where what remained of Japanese carrier air power was destroyed in a single afternoon. Through Leyte Gulf, where the last major fleet action in history ended with the IJN shattered and incapable of putting a coherent force to sea. It fought on a foundation of managed lies. The structure had been built at Midway, and it did not come apart easily. By 1944, only 34 magazines remained in publication across Japan. By 1945, only 1 newspaper was permitted per prefecture, and even those received only the paper the government chose to release. Japan's public began to understand what had happened in June 1942, only when Saipan fell in the summer of 1944 and the Tojo government collapsed beneath it. By then, the B-29s were already overhead. The carefully constructed narrative of unstoppable Japanese progress had become impossible to maintain. Not because the government chose honesty, but because reality had grown too large to stand in front of. The lie had run for 2 years. 2 full years of campaigns, casualties, and strategic decisions built on concealment. The secret patients, the men in the wards at Hashirajima, burning and silent while the radios played victory, were dispersed into the South Pacific, assigned to the grinding campaigns in the Solomons and the Bismarck Sea, and the majority died in battle there. They took what they knew with them. History cannot fully recover their names. The 3,000 families who waited for word of their sons received no bodies. The fleet had left in haste, and few were recovered from the water. There were no ships named in any official notification, no dates given, no locations, no explanation of how the men had died or why, or that the battle in which they died had reversed the course of the Pacific War in a single morning. What those families received from the government of Japan was the same answer the government gave its Axis allies, its army, its prime minister, and its own pilot training programs. Silence. That was the only answer. It was the answer for June 1942, and for July, and for the 2 years of campaigns that followed. Their sons went to the Pacific. The fleet came home without them. The country told itself it had won. And the men who had known, the ones who burned and survived and were classified and dispersed and forbidden to speak, went south into the war and were consumed by it, and the truth went with them, and what remained was the paperwork, the wards, the guards, the radios playing outside the walls. The silence was, in the end, the only thing the government of Japan gave those families that was entirely its own,